Mara Ionescu had worked in the castle kitchen for 11 years. She woke before the sun came up. She went to bed long after it went down. She peeled vegetables, scrubbed heavy pots, and carried buckets that made her arms ache. She did not complain. She did not talk much either. The other workers in the kitchen called her quiet. Some called her strange. She did not mind. She had always felt more comfortable in silence than in noise. The castle sat on a rocky hill in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania. It was old, very old. Its stone walls were thick and cold even in summer. In autumn, when the wind came down from the mountain peaks, it rattled the wooden shutters and pushed cold air under every door. By December, the forest around the castle turned dark and still. The pine trees stood like tall black shadows in the night. Snow filled the spaces between them. It was on one of those cold autumn evenings that Mara first saw the wolf. She had stepped outside through the back door of the kitchen, the way she did every evening. It was her job, and nobody else wanted it, to carry the day's leftover scraps down the stone path and empty them behind the supply shed. Old bones. Bread that had gone hard. Vegetable peels. Bits of fat trimmed from meat. She carried the bucket in both hands and walked quickly because the cold bit at her face. She set the bucket down near the shed and straightened up. That was when she saw the eyes. They were amber, pale gold, and they caught what little light came from the lantern above the kitchen door. They were still. They did not blink. They came from the space between two pine trees, just beyond the stone wall at the edge of the castle grounds. Mara's heart jumped. She took one step back. Then she stopped. The animal stepped forward slightly, and she could see it now. A wolf. Large, but not as large as the stories made wolves sound. Its ribs showed clearly through its gray and black fur. Its left back leg moved stiffly when it shifted its weight. It looked thin. It looked tired. And it looked at her with those pale gold eyes without any sign of rushing forward. Mara stood there for a long moment. She was not a brave woman in the way that people usually mean when they say brave. She did not climb mountains or fight for causes. But she was steady. She did not panic easily. She looked at the wolf and thought only one thing: this animal is starving. She picked up the scrap bucket. She walked slowly to the stone wall and set it on top. Then she backed away toward the kitchen door, step by careful step, watching the wolf the whole time. She went inside. She stood at the window. The wolf came forward. Slowly. It put its front paws on the wall and lowered its nose into the bucket. It ate. Mara watched until it was done. When the wolf pulled its head back and looked toward the window, almost as if it knew she was there, she stepped away from the glass. She did not sleep well that night, but not because she was afraid. She was thinking. The next evening, she set the bucket on the wall again. She waited by the window. The wolf came at the same time, just after the kitchen lantern was lit, just after the last light faded from the sky. It ate again. It left again. This became the arrangement between them. Mara began calling him Negru in her mind. The word meant black in Romanian, and she chose it for the dark patch that spread across his shoulders like a shadow. She never said the name out loud. It was just the name she used when she thought about him, which she found herself doing more than she expected. She started setting aside the better scraps during the day. Not much, just the pieces that would have gone into the waste bucket anyway. Venison bones with a little meat still on them. Pieces of bread soaked in the liquid left from cooking. Bits of fat that were too small to use but still had flavor and warmth in them. She was careful. She never took anything that was counted or measured. She only used what would have been thrown away regardless. Weeks passed. The scraps kept disappearing from the bucket each evening. And slowly, very slowly, Negru came closer. He stopped waiting for her to go inside before approaching. He would come to the wall while she was still standing in the cold, watching. He would eat with one eye on her, alert but not panicked. She stayed still. She never spoke. She never moved toward him. She understood, without anyone teaching her, that the most important thing she could do was to keep her distance and let him choose how close he wanted to be. One evening in November, he ate while she stood just 8 feet away on the other side of the wall. He lifted his head and looked at her directly. She looked back. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then he lowered his head and finished eating. She felt something she could not quite name. Not pride. Not happiness exactly. Something quieter than those things. Something like the feeling of being trusted. Teodora, one of the younger kitchen workers, noticed that Mara was taking longer than usual with the scrap bucket each evening. She mentioned it once to the head cook, Doamna Florescu, mostly because she was curious and not because she suspected anything serious. Doamna Florescu filed it away in her memory and said nothing yet. The wolf's territory, Mara did not know, stretched well beyond the castle wall and deep into the Carpathian forest. He moved through it every night, the old pine groves, the frozen stream beds, the rocky slopes where nothing much grew. He had learned the sense of the castle grounds over many weeks. He had learned the pattern of Mara's footsteps. He had learned that the woman with the bucket was not a threat. In the first week of December, a royal hunting party arrived at the castle. This was not unusual. The regional governor often brought guests for weekend hunts in the Carpathian forest. It was a tradition that had gone on for generations. The group arrived in 2 vehicles, loud and cheerful, carrying their equipment and filling the castle with more noise than it had heard in months. Among them was a young nobleman named Constantine Aldea, the son of a government minister from Bucharest. He was 26 years old, confident, and had been on many hunts before. He was the kind of young man who did not think much about the forest beyond what could be caught in it. On the second morning, the hunting group went out before sunrise. Constantine walked near the back of the group, distracted by a text message on his phone. He stepped off the marked trail without realizing it. The group moved on ahead. By the time he looked up, he could not hear them anymore. He walked in what he thought was the right direction. He walked for 20 minutes. He came to a ridge he did not recognize. He tried to climb down it and slipped on ice-covered rock. He fell into a shallow ravine, landed hard on his side, and twisted his ankle badly. He could put no weight on his right foot. His phone showed no signal. He called out twice, but the forest swallowed his voice. He sat down against a rock to think. That was when he heard the movement in the trees. He looked up and saw Negru standing at the edge of the ravine, looking down at him. Constantine went completely still. Every story he had ever heard about wolves in the Carpathian Mountains ran through his mind at once. He did not move. He did not breathe. Negru stood there for a long moment. Then he came down the slope carefully, keeping his weight off his old injury out of habit. He circled Constantine once, sniffing the air. Constantine pressed himself against the rock and waited. The wolf sat down about 10 feet away. He did not growl. He did not lower his head. He simply sat. And then, from the trees behind the ravine, there was a crack of branches and the heavy sound of an animal moving fast. A wild boar, large, dark, and startled by something, came crashing toward the ravine from the other side. It stopped when it saw the wolf. The 2 animals looked at each other. The boar made a short, warning sound and turned away, disappearing back into the trees. Negru looked back at Constantine. Constantine slowly let out the breath he had been holding. An hour later, when the hunting group's dogs finally picked up his scent and the party found him at the bottom of the ravine, they discovered him sitting quietly, and a large wolf sitting 10 feet away, watching the tree lean. The wolf slipped away before anyone could react. Constantine was helped back to the castle. His ankle was wrapped. He was given warm tea and a place to sit by the fire. But he could not stop thinking about what had happened. He described the wolf to the party's hunting master, large, black-shouldered, calm. The hunting master shook his head. Wild wolves did not behave that way around humans. Not unless someone had been making them comfortable around people. One of the castle staff, standing nearby, said they had heard that someone in the kitchen had been going out each evening with the scrap bucket and staying a very long time. The next morning, Doamna Florescu called Mara into the small office near the pantry. She asked her directly what she had been doing each evening. Mara looked at her without flinching. She said simply that a wolf had been coming to the back of the castle each night. That he had been very thin when she first saw him. That she had been leaving scraps for him. Doamna Florescu was quiet for a moment. She was not a harsh woman. But she was responsible for the castle's operations, and a wolf behind the kitchen was not a small matter. She reported what Mara had told her to the castle steward. The steward reported it to the governor's office. And within 2 days, someone had contacted the Royal Environmental Protection Guard. Mara did not know any of this was happening. She continued her work. She continued setting out the bucket each evening. Negru continued coming. On a Thursday morning, 4 days after Constantine's accident in the ravine, 3 people in official green uniforms arrived at the castle. Mara was in the kitchen when Doamna Floresca came and told her she was needed in the receiving room. She walked in and found a table with 3 people seated behind it. The one in the center was a woman, Dr. Elena Pawn, a wildlife biologist with the guard. She had short gray hair and calm, observant eyes. She introduced herself and explained why they were there. Constantine Aldea had not reported the incident as a danger. He had filed an official letter with the governor's wildlife office describing the wolf's behavior as extraordinary, and he had formally requested that the animal be assessed and placed under protection. But to approach the wolf safely, they needed to understand it. And to understand it, they needed to speak to the person who had been feeding it. Dr. Pawn asked her questions carefully and without judgment. How long had this been happening? What exactly had Mara been feeding the animal? Had she ever touched him? How close had he come? Did he ever show signs of aggression? Mara answered every question honestly. She described the first evening by the shed. She described the slow progress over the weeks. She described the evening he had eaten while she stood 8 feet away. She told them his leg had been injured when she first saw him but that it seemed to bother him less now. Dr. Pawn listened carefully and wrote in her notebook. When Mara finished, the doctor put her pen down. She told Mara that what she had done was something researchers spent years trying to achieve and rarely did. She had not made the wolf tame. She had simply given him a reason not to be afraid. That, Dr. Pawn said, was a very different thing. Tame animals lose something essential. This wolf had lost nothing. He had simply learned that one particular human was not a threat. And that knowledge, in the moment Constantine needed it most, had stayed with him. The following night, Mara walked with Dr. Pawn and 2 members of the guard to the back of the kitchen. She stood in her usual spot. She placed the bucket on the wall as she always did. She waited. Negru came at his usual time. He saw the other people and stopped. His ears went forward. He did not run. He looked at Mara. She did not move. She did not speak. She only stood the way she always stood, still, patient, not demanding anything from him. He came forward slowly. He came to the bucket. That was enough. The team worked quickly and carefully. Negru was tranquilized safely, causing him no harm. He was examined on a clean mat in the yard. The old leg injury, Dr. Pawn found, had healed almost completely, probably helped by the regular food over the winter months. He was healthy, well-nourished, and in good condition. A small tracking tag was fitted to his ear. Records were made. Everything was logged. He was carried back to the edge of the forest. When the tranquilizer wore off, he stood slowly. He looked around. He looked at the castle, at the lantern above the kitchen door, at the stone wall, at the woman standing a short distance away. Then he turned and walked into the trees. He did not look back. But he did not run either. He simply walked, evenly and without hurry, back into the forest that was his. Mara watched until the dark took him. Doamna Florescu wrote a formal note in Mara's file about the unapproved use of kitchen scraps. It was the mildest reprimand she could write while still putting something on paper. The following week, without explanation, she increased the kitchen's weekly supply order. There was simply more on hand now. What anyone did with it in the evenings was not something she looked at closely. Constantine Aldea returned to Bucharest. He spoke to a journalist he trusted, and in January a short article appeared in a Romanian magazine. It did not name Mara. It described only that a woman employed at the castle had, through quiet and consistent kindness, created a bond with a wild wolf that later led to the animal being officially protected. The article was not long. It did not make large claims. But it was read by a number of wildlife researchers, 2 of whom contacted the guard about using the castle's surrounding forest as a study area for wolf behavior. Dr. Pawn forwarded the inquiries to the appropriate offices. Mara did not read the article. She did not look for it. She had not told anyone her name, and she did not want anyone to know it. She continued her work in the castle kitchen. She continued waking before the sun came up. She continued going to bed long after it went down. She peeled vegetables, scrubbed heavy pots, and carried buckets that made her arms ache. Each December, the tracking data from Negru's tag showed a familiar pattern. He traveled his wide territory through the mountain forest. He moved through the frozen stream beds and the rocky slopes. And every winter, there was a cluster of location records near the back wall of the castle, in the same spot, around the same time each evening. He never came close enough to be seen by anyone watching. But he came back. Every year, he came back. Nobody asked Mara much about any of it. Once or twice a newer kitchen worker would hear a piece of the story from someone else and ask her if it was true, if she had really fed a wolf for months without telling anyone. She would say yes. They would wait for more. She would not give more. She would go back to whatever she had been doing. She did not think of what she had done as remarkable. She had seen something hungry. She had had something to spare. She had given it. The wolf had never asked her for anything beyond what she offered. She had never asked him for anything at all. That seemed to her like the right way for things to go. There is a kind of goodness that does not announce itself. It does not wait for anyone to be watching. It does not calculate what it might receive in return. It simply sees what is needed and responds to it, quietly, consistently, and without expecting the world to notice. Mara Ionescu was that kind of person. And somewhere in the Carpathian forest, a wolf with a tracking tag on his ear and an old scar on his left leg walked through the cold winter night, healthy and free, belonging entirely to himself.